Oops. Apparently this is going to be a day of technical difficulties. Otherwise known as Amy's difficulties. Well, hi everyone, I'm Amy Campbell, and I'm glad that you guys joined us on a really super cold day. I'm going to have Carlin open us up, and then we're going to just jump right into a session update. And then we did have a little bit of a change of plans. We were going to talk about the Mathematica report today, but unfortunately the individual who was going to do that is out ill. And so we were really pleased that we have two experts on guardianship that have joined us, and are really excited to hear from them. They've got so much information, and this is a pretty complicated issue. So we thought that that would be a good opportunity to kind of bring everybody up to speed on where we're at with those bills. And so, Carlin, I'll turn it right over to you. Do you have any updates? I can't see you, so. Carlin?
Amy, she might have stepped away for a minute.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just start going right into it, and then she can catch us up at the end, out of respect for everybody's time. But this has been kind of a whirlwind session. I think we've talked about that in our reports, but we're only 45 days into, oh geez, Amy. I keep hitting something on my desktop and it moves the screen. We're 45 days into the session, and it feels like it's been a lot longer with the number of bills that have been introduced. I counted them up this morning. They'll introduce some more today, but there's 1,273 bills already introduced. That's a lot. It's, you know, when you consider there's 150 people that can introduce bills, that's quite a bit of bills. But the number of bills that are actually live and being discussed is going to narrow down at the end of this next week. March 3rd is the first deadline that we have at the Capitol, and that's called a funnel. And it's because out of like the picture here, all the bills go into the top of the funnel and only a few make it out to the end. So by this deadline, by next Friday, House bills have to be out of House committees, and Senate bills have to be out of Senate committees. And so that's the first step in that process. So, you know, they get a subcommittee meeting and they get voted out of subcommittee, and then they have to be voted out of the full committee by next Friday. So you're going to see a lot of more frenzied action going on. There are a few bills that are funnel proof. They don't have to get through and meet those deadlines. And those are bills that deal with taxes and bills that deal with budgets or spending, and also anything that comes out of the government oversight committee or things that leadership sponsors. So there's a few things that are exempt from that. But I just wanted to kind of, even though we're coming right up on this next deadline and we're going to see a lot of bills kind of die off at the end of next week, I did want to let you know that March is going to be a pretty busy month. If you're probably like me, can't believe that we're already talking about March being next week, but in the middle of March, I don't know the exact dates, is when the legislators, there's a group called the Revenue Estimating Conference that'll look at how much money the state is bringing in taxes and fees and other revenue sources. And that's what they use to base their budgets on. So that's kind of mid-March becomes sort of the start of the budget process. So you'll start to see people kind of thinking about where they're going to put money. And I know a big discussion this year will be the Medicaid provider rates and the discussion that's been going on around that. And then we have a second deadline coming up at the end of March called the second funnel. And that's when House bills have to be out of Senate committees and Senate bills have to be out of House committees. So it will, if you're a House file, you have to have passed the House, then you have to get out of a Senate committee in order to beat that next deadline. So that's going to be a lot of meaning. There's going to be a lot of debating going on during the month of March. So I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of where we're at in the legislative session. April 28th is the final day of session, or the 110th day, but they can go longer or earlier, or adjourn earlier if they have their work done. Kind of wanted to give you, before we jump into guardianship, a little bit of an update on where some of those bills that we've been tracking for you are at in the process. And I have the links to the bill tracker down there for any other bills that you might be watching, but had some really good news this week with House File 2252. That is Representative Ingles' college transition program scholarship bill. So it creates scholarships for individuals, young adults with disabilities who want to go to these college-based programs after high school, like the REACH program at the University of Iowa. And there's a 2-year that's a 4-year program. And there's a 2-year program at Northwestern up in Northwest Iowa called the NEXT program. And so that would give scholarships. I think they capped it at $5,000 per person, $5,000 or $6,000 when they amended it. But they're going to be able to draw down vocational rehabilitation federal dollars with that program too, so they could expand it to more individuals. And those programs can be really expensive. So I know Carlin's son's in it now, and we had a group up at the Capitol this week from the REACH program. But that passed unanimously, 95-0 out of the House. And so that's well on its way to even beating that end of March deadline. We also have been watching House File 243 that passed the House 99-0, and it expands coverage for autism treatment, private insurance coverage. So it's not limited to the age, or you can't limit the number of treatments in those insurance plans. House File 275 is one we're very closely watching, and I know many of many of you are watching it too. But it eliminates that annual or that lifetime cap on home and vehicle modifications for those people that are in the ID waiver. Right now it's at $5,700, right around there, for the entire lifetime of the person for coverage. And this would realign that to being a annual cap of almost $6,800 that matches the brain injury waiver. So that really increases the capacity of individuals to modify their homes and cars as they need it throughout their lifetime. Senate file, so it's on the House floor, which means it came out of committee. So it is safe from that funnel, and it's ready for the debate in the House. Senate File 285 is a new bill, but it just was approved by subcommittee yesterday, and there's a House file that approved the subcommittee. I'm sorry, I only put the Senate file number on there, but there is a House bill that cleared a subcommittee yesterday. And then the Senate file that is listed there, 285, is up in subcommittee on Monday. So it's, I believe it will be out from the funnel next week. The plans are to run it in the education committees, but it allows parents to have their kids excused from school to receive autism treatment, including transportation to that, specifically for applied behavior analysis, the things that schools don't traditionally have within their IEP programs. Right now, there are some schools that are not excusing kids, and parents are being threatened with truancy. I learned that if a parent is charged with truancy, they can take away their driver's license. So there are some significant penalties with that. So this bill would just allow that not to happen, the truancy part not to happen to the parents. So that threat would be gone. Senate File 177 is something that some of our folks on the board have been working on, the council have been working on, that would require training on seizure protocols in schools, so that they are prepared in the event that a student has a seizure in those schools. And that has been approved by a Senate subcommittee. We're hoping that can get on the calendar for committee work next week, so it gets out from the funnel. I'm sorry, I have a little bit of a cold, so I've got a stuffed up nose. I don't think we've talked on this capital chat about the Department of Health and Human Services bill that kind of makes some changes to the regions, mental health and disability services regions. Those bills will be out from the funnel. The House bill is already out. Unfortunately, they don't have the new numbers yet. When a study bill gets voted out of committee, it gets a House file or a Senate file number. And so those numbers are going to be changed. So I'm confident that I'll have it today or Monday. So hopefully we'll have the new numbers in our capital report this week. So watch for your emails on that. But they make some significant changes in the regions, specifically adding community-based competency restoration for people that are not competent to stand trial and as a core service. But I think important to all of us is they're going to change the regional governing boards, so there's more stakeholders having a vote on those. So they're going to allow providers to vote, and they're going to add somebody from law enforcement and the judicial district, so a judge or somebody that works in the courts to those. And then they're going to limit county supervisors membership to only being 49% of the board. So that means stakeholders would have the majority of board votes in those. And so I think some regions like it, some regions don't. So, but I think uniformly all of the provider organizations and advocacy organizations support that change. I wanted to highlight a couple other good bills that have come out this week specifically from Representative Josh Turek, who I know some of you have met and talked to on these chats. But House File 387 requires Medicaid to cover catheters that do not have this chemical DEHP. Don't ask me what it stands for. I wouldn't be able to pronounce it, but it's a carcinogen, so it causes cancer. And he has some real good backing statistics about the much higher rate of cancer in individuals who are using catheters, and Medicaid won't pay for those. They pay for a very cheap version that has that in it. So that bill has been introduced, and I've noted who's on that subcommittee: Representative Fry, Bradley, and Turek. And then there's 3 bills that have been introduced that are called Work Without Worry, that allows an individual with a disability to own a pretty expensive home. I think it was a $400,000 cap, and own and make a good salary and still be able to get some Medicaid services without risk of losing those things that support them and help them get to work every day and enable them to be able to be a part of that workforce. And so that is modeled after a Colorado program. And I think we're going to talk about that more in the future. I don't really have a lot of details on it right now. And I'm not sure if it's going to move forward this year, but I know that it's getting a lot of interest, including Senator Zahn, a Republican who's in the leadership capacity in the Senate, has introduced the bill in the Senate side. So I think that's something to watch. And certainly if it does start to move forward, we will get a lot more detail on that. Otherwise, it might be something that we're going to continue to talk about over the summer and into next year. Very quickly, a couple of bad things. Carlin and I participated in a subcommittee yesterday on 3 voting bills that really limit and threaten the ability of Iowans with disabilities to vote, including one that would require anybody voting in person early to cast a provisional ballot, which means it's not when you go to vote early, you have to show your ID, you have to show all of this information anyway. And then adding to the fact that it would just be a provisional ballot and may or may not be counted in that process is concerning. Another bill would create a list of ballots and include how the person voted in that list, which really threatens private voting, the privacy that you have in choosing your candidates. So in particular, in smaller precincts, you could probably identify who it is and how they voted. And that's very, very scary. The other bill allows anyone in any county in Iowa to challenge anybody's registration, which could cause chaos with county auditors if somebody challenges every Democrat's registration or every Republican's registration. They don't, they could do that as well. Finally, the two public assistance eligibility reform bills, the ones that are concerning us that they might accidentally kick off people that are eligible for food assistance or Medicaid off their services. Those bills are not yet out of committee, so we're watching to see if those come out of committee next week. If they don't, I'm sure it'll come back and be a subject that is discussed during the budget process. So that was a little bit longer than I anticipated, but I want to just pause for a second before we go into our next part and see if anybody has any questions. I'm gonna take my share screen off so I can see you all. Oh, Brady's on too. Hi, Brady.
Hi, Amy. Sorry I was late today. I forgot that I had this meeting. I got busy with work and went on lunch break. Go, oh, I have a meeting.
For those of you that don't know Brady, everybody knows Brady, but Brady's our chair of our council. So any questions before I move on to the next one on those bills or other bills that I didn't cover?
Amy, can I make the comment if nobody has a question?
Yeah.
So, hi everyone, it's Carlin Crow, and I was late to the call too. I apologize. But I had a phone call from Representative Josh Turek right before this call, and he was updating me about his two bills that Amy just talked about. And he said that after being guaranteed subcommittee meetings on him, now he's being told that the subcommittees are not going to meet. So he's was looking for some advice on what to do next. And I said, maybe we can get some calls into people who could change that for you. So Representative Fry would be someone to contact if you are very interested in the safe catheters bill and also the work without worry bill. He said that there was a technicality in that bill that the Senate didn't like, but they're working on it, and it's got to get out of the House first though. So Representative Fry is also on that subcommittee and the chair that needs to schedule the meeting. So for both of those bills, contacting Representative Fry would be a good idea if you're very interested in them.
Yeah, and if you go to the DD Council website, you can use our Take Action Center to do that, or you can just send it to them directly. I will include that in my report this week with their email addresses if you want to do that. For those that may not know, it's just their first name, a period, their last name at legis.iowa.gov. And so it would be like joel.fry@legis.iowa.gov. But I will have those in there. You can also, I don't know, Carlin, if you can type into the chat the legislative website email, or add legislative website address, they can find the legislators' emails that way too. That's great. It's a sad update, but I also think that when you have new ideas like these, sometimes it takes a couple years to get people ready to pass them. Much like guardianship, a couple years, not just a couple years, but you know, the guardianship bill has been worked on for at least 5 or 6 years, but we have talked about this over the course of those years, and it is a complicated issue. Carlin and I are still trying to grasp all of the details of it. But we have in the legislature this year 2 competing ideas. One is Senate File 295 and is the Senate approach, and one that many advocates, including Bill Stumpf, who is a former Iowa DD Council member and an advocate, and you can see the picture of Kyle, his son, and him. I couldn't decide which pictures, but I love that picture to use. But this is the one that he and Professor Josy Gittler, who's at the University of Iowa College of Law, and has expertise in the guardianship, served on the Supreme Court's guardianship task force, and have been supporting. And then there is another set of bills. The House version is House Study Bill 109, and that takes a different approach. An approach that both of our advocates today are opposed to. And so we thought it might be beneficial to just have them talk about it and really go through the details of what they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish in that. So I am going to turn it over to Josy and Bill to kind of talk about their bills.
So I'm Josephine Gittler, and I am a law professor at the University of Iowa College of Law. Just want to make sure I have the law school IT person standing next to me, because I've always usually give off emanations that create problems when I try to participate in Zoom meeting. Can everybody hear me and see me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to start, and then Bill is going to take over from me. I think probably most of you know what guardianship and conservatorship is, but for those of you that don't, a guardian is someone that the court appoints to make decisions for an adult with what's said to be diminished decision-making capacity, who cannot therefore care for and protect herself or himself. And a conservator is someone who the court appoints for an adult with diminished decision-making capacity, who as a result can't manage their financial affairs. And there are a lot of persons under guardianship and conservatorship, 23,000. And the majority of them have intellectual disabilities due to Down syndrome or some other condition. They are at high risk for abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. And I had a sheet that I think is available to you that has some examples of actually guardians and conservators who have engaged in abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation of the persons that they're responsible for. One of the examples is a gentleman, a man with intellectual disabilities, who the court appointed as his guardian and conservator, his aunt and his niece. As the sheet that has this example says, they stole $50,000 from him. They contacted him generally only once a month. They only gave him $10 at a time, and his neighbors would bring him canned foods because he always ran out of food. So that's an example of a person with intellectual disability whose guardian and conservator, his aunt and his niece, were abusing him, neglecting him, and financially exploiting him. And there are other examples on the sheet that you can look at. In 2019, the Iowa legislature passed comprehensive legislation to reform the guardianship and conservatorship system. And the goal of this legislation was to provide more and better protection for the very vulnerable persons that were that are under guardianship and conservatorship. And it incorporated, it reflected the recommendations of an Iowa Supreme Court task force that had 70 people on it from all over Iowa that represented all the major stakeholders in the system. And that task force worked for 2.5 years and came up with about 200 recommendations because they found so many problems with the system, so many deficiencies with the system. So one of the things that the 2000 legislation focused on was making it easier for the courts who have the responsibility for overseeing guardianships and conservatorships to have the information needed to make sure that all the persons under guardianship and conservatorship were receiving needed care and were receiving needed protection. So one thing that was done was to require when a new guardian or a new conservator was appointed by the court, they had to make a plan. They had to sit down and decide what the needs of the person they were going to be responsible for were and give that to the court so that the court could decide if there were any problems or not. And if there were, could prevent the problems from occurring. And Bill's going to talk to you about that. Another thing that the legislation did was it said after the plan was given to the court and approved by the court, every year a guardian or a conservator had to submit an annual report to the court with the information that the court needed to make sure that the guardian or the conservator was doing what they were supposed to do, and that the person they were responsible for under guardianship or conservatorship was getting needed care and was getting the needed protection. Well, before the 2019 legislation, many guardians and conservators only had to submit a report every 3 years or every 5 years. And so the court didn't even find out about if something was wrong for several years. And at that point, oftentimes couldn't correct what had been done that was wrong. And Bill's going to talk to you about that. What the legislation did not do, and what the two bills that Amy has mentioned, the Senate bill and the House bill, deal with, is the following. The legislation in 2019 didn't spell out in detail what information guardians and conservators had to report in their plans and in their annual reports. So the Senate bill provides more protection to guardians and conservators because it makes sure that guardians and conservators report the information the court needs to protect better those under guardianship and conservatorship. So it requires every guardian and every conservator to report the same information that the court needs, regardless of whether they're represented by an attorney or what form they use. Right now, if you are represented by an attorney, a guardian or conservator doesn't have to report all the information that the court needs, while a person that's not represented by an attorney does have to report all the information the court needs. So that doesn't really make much sense, right? And that is what the Senate bill says shouldn't continue. Everybody should be required who's a guardian or conservator to report the same information that the court needs to make sure that the person under guardianship or conservatorship receives needed care and protection. The other thing that the Senate bill does is it says that a attorney who submits a report for a conservator has to explain what monies were done, what was done with the monies of the person under conservatorship, and whether it was for the benefit of the vulnerable person under conservatorship. Right now, there are some lawyers that unfortunately are submitting reports that contain red flags for misappropriation and misuse of funds. And third thing the Senate bill does is it says that if a judge suspects that in a particular case there is abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation going on, that judge must refer the case to the county attorney for review and possible prosecution. Now, the House bill doesn't do any of those things. It, in fact, would decrease protections for persons under guardianship and conservatorship by reducing reporting requirements if a judge decided that there didn't need to be as much reporting as it currently is required. So I think Bill and I think I can speak for Bill on this and he can confirm it. We would say to you all, we know you are advocates for persons with disabilities, and we think that all persons who are advocates for those with disabilities should support the Senate bill, which does increase the protection for very vulnerable persons under guardianship and conservatorship from abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. We think that all of you who are advocates for persons with disabilities should oppose the House bill because it will decrease the protection. It will really, what it will do is it will allow lawyers and their clients who are guardians and conservators to not have as much by way of reporting to the court that the court needs. And also it will allow some lawyers to continue submitting reports that are red flags for misappropriation and misuse of funds. So I want to just turn things over to Bill by saying the following comment. Unfortunately, the opposition to the original 2019 legislation and to bills since then to do needed amendments has come primarily from a small group of lawyers who are represented by the Iowa State Bar Association and the Iowa Academy of Trusts and Estates. And sadly for me, because I'm a lawyer and I'm a law professor, there have been many statements made, many claims made by opponents that simply aren't true. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Bill to talk about that.
Thanks, Josie. And hi, everybody. I think a lot of you know me and have probably heard my sort of spiel on this already. So I apologize if it's redundant for you, but it is really something that I've become very passionate about. Thank the DD Council for giving us this opportunity to speak to y'all today. And also I want to thank Josie, who has really guided me through some of this process, and I'm learning a little more about the law than I ever thought I would. So I just want to get that in there. Many of us on here are advocates, and one thing that I've learned about being an advocate is that if I don't understand something, I want to learn about it. And the best way to learn is to go to the folks that have the know-how. And you arm yourself with knowledge. I think there's a quote somewhere talking about that from one of our founding fathers. But so background more on me that folks don't know is that, again, my name's Bill Stumpf. I became a nurse at 50 years old. Prior to that, I worked for 30 years in a manufacturing facility. I'm also a guardian for my adult son, Kyle, who you've seen in the picture. who has an intellectual disability and is 33 years old and lives with me. And I think many of you have already met him, and he's amazing. I'm currently retired and I'm enjoying it. So under the old law prior to 2019, I just basically reported this same information every year to the court, or every 3 years. I would correct that. I had a 3-year period where I could report. And what the report did was to report what you did the last 3 years. And it was very basic information, and you could get into detail if you want, but you didn't have to. So basically it was a sheet like this, both sides, 2 pages. Most of it was checking boxes. And it was what we did the last 3 years. And basically it took them to the doctor, clothed them, did this, did that, it wasn't real detailed. So now I provide the court with a care plan. And just note on care plans, as a nurse, a care plan is something that looks to the future. The hope as a healthcare provider is that you're going to be able to discharge that person someday, or at least give them a good quality of life. So you want to set that out looking forward, not what you did in the past, because it's kind of irrelevant, to be honest with you. So now I do that care plan and file it with the court every year. They've eliminated the 3-year, plan that you could do before. Well, really wasn't a plan. It was basically saying what you did the last 3 years. I do use the Supreme Court forms. They're not difficult. Learned a new word in this process, onerous. It's been thrown around a lot, but it basically means that it's a very difficult process. Quite frankly, it's not. I haven't had to hire a lawyer to help me with it. And again, I'm not an attorney or even close to that by any stretch. The latest annual review I did completed was about a week ago, Saturday. It took me about an hour and a half. And what it basically does is your care plan becomes sort of a living document, and it lays everything out, in detail. How is Kyle going to see his siblings, and how am I going to do that? His friends, and how am I going to do that? So it's more detailed. So what the reviews do, and also physicians carry that out, then the annual review basically goes over those questions and asks, okay, if you did it, how did you do it? And if you didn't do it, why did you not do it? So there's oversight there. I was worried at first. Honestly, it was a long form, and I know a lot of you will relate to this. We're sick of long forms, but this is information that a guardian would know, and quite frankly, should know. It's not, it's basically what I laid out, and we would know that. If we don't know those things, I have some concerns then. So it is the information that the court will need to have make sure that guardians and conservators are accountable for how they carry out their responsibilities to people like my son. I do worry of what's going to happen when I'm gone. And what the care plan does is as I said, I call it a living document. And whoever takes over for me or steps in will have that document as sort of a baseline, and will understand. And as we all know, a big piece is, even if you're not a conservator, financial and issues are there. And Kyle has an able account. A lot of you are familiar with that, but there's a lot of folks that aren't, and how to make sure special needs trusts are done correctly. And all of this is really why I can't say enough that I support Senate File 295. And I've been to the Capitol more times this year than I care to admit already, but it has been, feels like a long session, as Amy pointed out. So I can kind of relate to that, although they were good visits, because again, I was able to tell our story, and I totally oppose House Study Bill 109. And the reason I oppose that is due to the reporting requirements. And I think it would be a mistake to go backwards. I don't think it should be an easy cakewalk for anybody to report what they're doing to support that protected person. And if you're not, that person's at risk. And also the oversight piece, because the courts would have this document to go back on. I use an example sometimes. If a neighbor notices, and this is similar to the case in Burlington, if a neighbor would notice something going on at my house, say, this just doesn't seem right, and it doesn't appear that Kyle's being taken care of, they can report that, and then the court would have the document and look at that, and there you have what I said I would do, and if I'm not doing it, then there's oversight there, and they have that document to go by. Again, I'm going to stress care plans look at the future, not at the past. And I think consistency is good, and I think the same form should be used for everyone. And I will point out that even though it's 18 pages, many of the questions may not be pertinent, and that's fine. They may be for some, but a lot of them can be marked NA. Basically, mostly what we do is how he connects with his family, his loved ones, his friends, how he gets out in the community, what kinds of things does he do in the community. I put on there that he's a very good advocate for himself, and I believe he is. So, you know, a lot of things like that. And that didn't exist before. So there was really no, guardians didn't have to be compliant with it because there wasn't anything written down. I just think also that why go back? I think all the folks that at least were existing guardians, conservators, when the new law took effect, have now gone through this process. And why change it up now? Because change can be very confusing for folks. And it's also, they talk about a two-tiered system. That concerns me because where do you draw the line? I did hear some rumblings that it may be an attorney that makes that decision where the line is drawn. Quite frankly, I don't need an attorney to tell me how to be a guardian for my son, unless I'm doing something incorrectly. And that's the place of the court system. So I think it could be confusing as to where the line would be drawn. So I again can't say I support Senate File 295 enough, and the House Bill 109 just doesn't do the things that I think protected persons and people that are vulnerable need and deserve. So with that, I'm going to quit rambling, and if you all have any questions for Josy or I, we'd be more than happy to answer.
Can I make a comment? Thank you. Hi, I'm Amy Dessenberg-Wines, and I manage the Iowa Coalition for Integration and Employment and have worked on systems change and been a strong advocate for folks with disabilities forever. Also a former council member, served on the council for 6 years and have great respect for the work of the council. I just wanted to make a comment because this is an area of interest that I've tried to dive into more recently and learn about this. And I remember when the legislation first passed, and at a coalition meeting, we had conversations about how are we going to deal with all of this new process? You know, I remember a lot of parents and guardians in that discussion. And I guess I just wanted to share a couple of comments. One is I am really advocating to support the Senate file and to oppose the House study bill. And the reason for this is I see that there are a lot of vulnerable Iowans, and I guess I can't understand why someone who would have an attorney represent them would be needing to be less accountable for what information is important to protect individuals who are the most vulnerable. I also have heard, you know, some, I'm seeing and I'm encouraging to other disability and advocacy organizations to declare how they feel about this, because I see a lot that are undecided. And I guess I'm a little concerned. It feels a little like a bit of a David Goliath thing when you're looking at attorneys who have very strong connections and you know, power, essentially, to say, you know, we don't want to do more complex paperwork. It concerns me because I don't really see this being driven by individuals and parents and family members and guardians and conservators. I see it driven by attorneys. And I've heard that some of the arguments are that, boy, we sure have a deficit when it comes to people volunteering to be a guardian. And I think that that is a huge problem we need to address. This legislation has nothing to do with that. It's not going to make it more complex. It's not going to, you know, either somebody wants to be a guardian and take on those full responsibilities, or a conservator, or they don't. And if we have a deficit, that's a different issue. Throwing out protections, not aligning support with what was recommended by bipartisan task force seems kind of ludicrous to me. So I really want to encourage any disability organizations, advocates, to actually speak up, because it's a little scary to me right now that we might go backwards because of powerful lobbyists or because of attorneys. And I'm more concerned about vulnerable Iowans. So I thank you for giving me my 2-cent time. And I'd really like to encourage the Iowa Developmental Disabilities Council to speak up on this issue. And I'd like to encourage the others who have either not shared a declaration or listed themselves as undecided. That basically to me says we're not going to commit, and let's hope nothing bad happens to the people that we're supposed to advocate for. Anyway, thank you.
Could
Thanks,
I ask, Amy, could you show the sheet of what people could do and who they could contact?
Yes, I was about ready to do that. Thank you, Amy, for saying that. And I would also say that I was in a meeting yesterday with the Brain Injury Alliance and On With Life, who I also represent, and in talking to Representative Gustav. And he's very much looking at the Senate bill. I think that Josy and her folks have made great progress in that area. So some of the people that would have been problems last year with the Senate bill passing in the House did not win their primaries. So I think you have a fresh start. So Josy had some thoughts about who you could contact and what you could do, and I'm about to share those here. I might accidentally lose Josy and Bill in the process here on the screen, but I'm going to try to do this. Try to do this here. Let's see. You guys seeing this now?
Yes.
Okay, so you're seeing the guardianship, what you can do to.
Yep.
Okay, great. There you go, Josy.
And I realized looking at this that I made some typos, but please forgive me. So, you know, what can you do if you, as we are urging you to, to express support for Senate File 295 in opposition to House Study Bill 109? Well, I would say, first and foremost, contact Representative Bill Stumpf, who's vice chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and who is really the key legislator when it comes to what happens with the House and whether the House goes forward with its bill that we think should be opposed, or whether it accepts the Senate bill, which we think should be supportive. And here you see his email. You also certainly can contact your own senator and your own representative in the Iowa legislature. And I understand, is this right, Amy, that on the DD Disabilities Council's website, there is information about how to identify one's own legislator and how to contact them. Is that correct?
That is correct in our Take Action Center, and yes, on the website. I also will note that your materials and resources will be on the InfoNet part of the website this afternoon. I just have to upload them there so you can easily find them.
Okay, and so there is a fact sheet for you to look at to consider in expressing support for Senate File 295 in opposition to House Study Bill, 109. And also, as Amy, the other Amy, said, another thing that you can do that would be extremely helpful is you can ask organizations to which you belong to register in favor of Senate File 295 and against House Study Bill 109 on the website of the legislature. And certainly I can help you with that. And I assume, Amy, you could help anybody that would like information about that also, correct?
Yes, and we will put something up on our Take Action Center as well that automatically sends to your legislator a note about this. I'm going to continue to encourage people to not use a form letter. We'll put some basic stuff in there, but I think you really have to fill that in with your own story and your own experience, because in Iowa, legislators quickly see form letters and just don't pay attention to them. When you send them to Congress, it matters, but not at the state level. They really want to hear your own individual story. So I put up action alerts on the Take Action Center, but it's really important that you don't just send the message that's in that letter that I put up. You actually modify it, change it so it doesn't look like a form letter. But yes,
Hey, just noticed in the chat that Brady has a question. If we can give him a minute.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, Amy, you mentioned that you are, you oversee the On of Life program. And, I know too, Bill, because we've worked on this with Upgrade Medicaid, but, in 2024, which fortunately, it's going to be next year, but the Glenwood Resource Center is going to be closing down. On of Life, at the Glenwood Resource Center in Glenwood, rented a space in one of their buildings so they could serve people in Glenwood. Unfortunately, it's going to be, the Glenwood Resource Center is closing down in 2024. It looks like July of 2024. How is this going to look for the On of Life residents that were living in Glenwood to be able to move and live in a safe and healthy environment like they did in Glenwood? Is the state of Iowa assisting those individuals moving from On of Life in Glenwood to move to another either On of Life facility or another facility that could serve the needs that they need?
Could I interject here, because I'm serving as a consultant to Chief Judge Larson, who is the chief judge for Mills County, where Glenwood is located.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been serving as a consultant to him with respect to the guardianship issues arising from the closure of Glenwood. And so I do have some information about that. The Department of Human Services, and particularly the two managed care organizations in the state, are charged with finding hopefully home and community-based settings for the residents of Glenwood who do now have to be relocated because of the closure. I'd like to just say one thing. I'm very worried about some of the residents.
So am I.
And what's going to happen to them. I reviewed 90 case files of court files of Glenwood residents, and some of them have been there for a very long time, decades.
Mhm.
And the only home that they have known really
Yep.
is Glenwood, and their support system has been the staff and other residents of Glenwood. And now they're being moved somewhere else,
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I lived at Glenwood as a client from 2011 to 2018. So I know exactly what has been going on there. And when I found out that Glenwood was closing, I was just stunned. I was heartbroken. And then basically I asked the question of why. And, we had the big long investigation going on there. And I just want to say, I think this was not an easy situation to deal with. And when they ended up letting Director Jerry Ray go and the director of DHS and Kelly Garcia came in, I want to kind of give a shout out to Kelly Garcia because she came in the middle of all of this. And, for a position in a job like her, like she has, it's not easy to come in and say, to overview an investigation that was so intense, an investigation that was being conducted because it affected so many people. Kelly Garcia came in with a positive attitude and she said, this is what we need to do to change. This is what we need to do for our staff, for our state employees, for our clients we serve. And she has done a phenomenal job. And a lot of people just hear so much of the negative stuff about Glenwood and everything that's happened. But we need to hear the stories from people like me that have lived experiences in the positives, because not everything about Glenwood is just all negative.
Mr.
Yeah,
Worker,
thank you,
I
Brady.
wanted to tell you that one of my concerns has been that some of the residents who have been there for decades and are getting on in years, there's going to be relocation trauma. And so I am putting together with some experts here at University of Iowa, an informational training, I guess you would call it, for guardians of persons at Glenwood about that, so that they can be aware to watch for that and to be helpful if that occurs. So I think I agree with everything you've said, Mr. Worker, and we need to really be sure that the transition goes as smoothly as possible.
Brady, just real quickly before, I know we're running out of a little bit of time, but I will say that On With Life is moving their folks too because of the uncertainty about what is going to happen with the facility itself. And they looking at purchasing some of the cottages that are going to be vacated, but the price point came back higher than it would be to renovate an existing facility somewhere else. So they have gone through the certificate of need process and they're taking over a nursing facility that closed in Polk City. So it's closer to their campus, their main campus. So for workforce issues, it's going to be a lot better for them. And, but no, since they're not really considered part of the Glenwood campus, it's kind of been there on their own, making those with the families, trying to figure out how to how to make that happen and happen as smoothly and carefully, because it's a very high risk population to move. And so they've been working with families to figure out what the families want to do. I think there's some options for them to stay at the nursing home that's on the as well. If they want to stay in that area, or if they want to go somewhere else out of state is really the only other option, or move to Polk City. So there's 32 people, so it's happening, so they'll be prepared. I think it's not their, I mean, it's obviously a cost to them to do that. But I did want to, while we still have people on, I want to turn to Carlin for our shout out, because we had, as you can see, some folks up there meeting with the state auditor in that photo there. So I'm going to turn it over to Carlin real quick.
Thanks, Amy. And shout out first to Josy and Bill for being here today and sharing all that great information, and also for all the work that you've been doing at the Capitol and on these issues. I've learned from you. I know Bill has been at at least a couple subcommittees where he's driven a long way to be here to educate legislators on these bills, and really appreciate that so much, and for being here. And we'll give you a bigger shout out next week too. But wanted to shout out this week to these students from the University of Iowa Reach program who were here yesterday, spent all day at the Capitol, got here early to be recognized in both the House and Senate. And they're the Reach Student Council. And the Reach program is, Amy mentioned it earlier today, and we've talked about it a couple of times, but it's a 4-year program at the University of Iowa for students with intellectual and cognitive disabilities. They can graduate early in years 2 or 3, because it's not a degree program. It's a certificate program, but this is one of the programs that would be supported by the scholarship bill that Amy also talked about, House File 252, which has passed the House. So prior to coming to the Capitol, they had already reached out to their legislators about that bill, and to promote scholarships so that more kids like them, more students like them, could go to get into the Reach program. Also, their leadership was there yesterday, and they're talking to both Iowa State and University of Northern Iowa about doing similar programs so that more kids can get into these transition programs and do internships and career exploration and have a college experience. So it was really great to have them, and they got to meet with Auditor Sand, with the Attorney General. They were all over the place, got to climb to the top of the dome. And so they had a great day. And so they were on our Capitol Days grant program. They were one of the first groups to come. And so these are some of the fun things that we can do on our Capitol Days. So if you have an organization that wants to come, or you want to come, even if you're not part of the program this year, the grant program, please let us know, and we can help you set up meetings or come to the Capitol. Or I think I need to start calling Bill and see how he gets into all these meetings and does such great commentary. He's a great mentor for us and for all of you. So, so shout out to them. And we probably should talk about what's next. You have a slide for that, Amy? Oh, this is your slide.
Sorry, I muted myself. I think just to end, just a reminder of those dates. We send out our updates on Monday morning. If you haven't watched our Capitol snapshots, you should. They're fascinating, right, Carlin? The most fascinating is when it's not us. And then our next Capitol chat will be March 31st, and that is the same day as the second funnel. So that'll be an important one, because we can talk about all the bills that are dead, and all of the bills that are still moving forward. And by then we might even know some information about budgets. So I think also we had talked about having the presentation on the Medicaid rates. Was that right, Carlin?
Yeah, that'll be in March.
Okay, so we'll have what we had planned for today with an update on the Mathematica report and the waivers and the Medicaid rates structure. What presentation will be in March too. So that'll be well timed because they'll be starting to talk about budgets then too. So just mark your calendars. You can go to iowaddcouncil.org and sign up for the Capital Chats. They're under our events and under InfoNet as well. So you can find, and we'll have the video posted there as well.
And one more thing.
Oh,
One
go
more
ahead.
thing. Between now and then, on March 9th, we will be, well, we won't be, but we have asked 2 representatives and 2 senators to introduce resolutions that make March as Disability Awareness Month. So early in the morning on March 9th in both the House and Senate, that will be introduced. So if you're interested in being there, we're getting ready to send out invites. The House resolution just came out yesterday, so it's ready to go. And we're not having a big hill or anything like that. We're just kind of setting off the month with this resolution. And we had some advocates that pushed it with their legislators, and that's how this came about. So we'll be giving them shout outs also, but watch for that information to come out. If you're interested in coming and being a part of that, we'd love to have you there.
Hey,
Well,
Carlin, can I say something real quick before we go?
Hold on, Brady, let me finish.
Okay,
this part
sorry.
first. Also, I just want to remind people, you don't actually physically have to be at the Capitol to watch that happen. So if getting to the Capitol is difficult for you, I will make sure, Carlin and I will make sure that you have the link to watch it when it's coming up, because you can watch it from your computer or smartphone.
Thank you.
Sorry, Brady, go ahead now.
So I did want to let everybody on this meeting today know, the DD Council was supposed to participate at the end of March in the Disability Policy Seminar Conference that is usually held every year in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, the venue location on where this is going to take place in D.C. is being renovated. So they had to change the date on that. So they changed it to, I think, Carlin, it was the end of April. And the first day is going to be virtually for people to attend. And then I believe the next day or two is going to be a fly-in day to DC. The DD Council decided, since it wasn't a 3 full day event in DC, that we weren't going to send anybody this year due to the changes of the dates and stuff, the times that we would be there. But I did want to share, I am still going to be going, I think maybe the week before, the week after the Disability Policy Seminar. I am going to be going to DC to do some educating and advocacy on what issues and stuff are going on here in Iowa. I'll be meeting with Chuck Grassley, Joni Ernst, and then my local congressman, Ashley Henson. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. I will be the only representative from the DD Council going, and I really hope that this will offer a great opportunity to educate and advocate for the people that are living with every day with disabilities. So just wanted to share that with you guys, and I'm very excited to be able to go to DC. I've never been there before, and this will just be an awesome experience.
Thanks for sharing that. Thanks everybody for being here today, especially Bill and Josy. Thanks for all the information and for great
Thank you.
presentation. Thanks, Amy, for all you do.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.